Hi, this is Joy at Red Pine Quilt Shop. Today we are going to talk about making piece borders for quilts, and I'm going to start by sharing my absolute favorite book with you. It is the Ultimate Quilt Finishing Guide from Harriet Hargrave and her daughter Carrie, and it is packed full of pieced border ideas and setting options for adding borders to your quilts. And it is so much more fun to add piece borders. She's got some basic instructions on batting, backing, and binding in here as well, but it has 100+ piece border ideas for you and setting options for setting blocks on point. And it is a wonderful, wonderful option packed full of ideas to give you inspiration the next time you want to make a piece border for your quilt. I pull this book out and use it all the time. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek at one of the borders that is included in the 100+ in the book. This is a wonderful border option that is a brick style border option. You start out with this by making these little sections. It's super fun to make them scrappy. It's a great way to use up leftover fabric that you might have after making a quilt, and you can add a wonderful piece to border to your quilt to make it a little bigger if you'd like. So you'll notice that you have the brick in the center, and the background pieces on the ends are not square. She has you cut these a little bigger because it makes it a little bit easier to piece the blocks, and it gives you a little bit of fudge factor. So those are intentionally cut as a rectangle rather than a square. So when you go to piece these, what you want to do is you want to mark the halfway point on your bricks. And when you piece them, it looks a little goofy, but you're going to match actually the seam line and the tick mark up and stagger it basically for how I have cut these. Now it depends on how you're cutting your bricks. This could vary a little bit depending on how you choose to do your sizing, and Harriet explains all of that in the book, but the way that I have mine sized, that midpoint is my match-up point, and I like to match up the seam line with the tick mark. After you sew it, you will have a section that looks like this, and here I've got 4 of them that I've sewn together. Now when I go to trim these, I like to trim them a little bit further than 1/4 of an inch away from the point. So if I trimmed it right at 1/4 inch, my piecing would have to be perfect, or I would start knocking corners off the bricks. So I like to actually add about 1/16 of an inch, and I don't add a full 1/8 of an inch, but I add about 1/16 of an inch, and that is where I normally line up my ruler when I go to trim the side angles off my blocks. And it just gives you a little fudge factor. When you do that, you're going to have just a tiny little bit of float on the points of your bricks. But the nice thing is you won't lop any of the corners off. And after you have cut your bricks, you're going to have bias on the edge of your brick sections. So the one thing that I highly recommend that you do is, I call it a stay stitch, is to take, and before you even attach the border to your quilt, I immediately take my brick sections to my sewing machine, bump your stitch length up to like 4 millimeters, and just do a quick stitch. You want to run this at a shallow 1/4 of an inch because you want it to get buried in the seam line when you sew, or in this case it'll be under the binding. But run a stitch along that edge before you even attach the brick section to your quilt, because that will stabilize those bias edges and you won't have issues with anything stretching while you're handling it. The book has wonderful instructions in it. She walks you through doing all the math to calculate the sizing. So if you want to make a brick border and have it come out exactly right to finish the side of a quilt, you can go ahead and do that. And she's got all the math calculations in the book for you. Now on this quilt, I opted to just put the border treatment in as a corner basically. So I ran it across part of the top and part of the side, and I didn't run it all the way down. I just pieced it into the border and used up some of the scraps that I had from this project. So that is just one of the many, many great options in the Quilt Finishing Guide. You can find that book on our website at redpinequiltshop.com. Thanks for joining us.